Welcome to Straight Talks Unedited. And uh, we know that the world, especially the climate world, is in a sense of disarray with Donald Trump coming to the presidency, U.S. presidency for the second time, and uh, and people are uh, expecting uh, maybe worse, maybe similar to the last time, maybe better. So I have with me Harjeet, my very good friend Harjeet Singh, who is one of the leading light of the anti-fossil fuel movement across the world, a very important climate activist at the global scale. Harjeet, welcome to the show. And
Thank you,
let's go to the
Jayanta.
point straight away. Donald Trump 2.0 and the way he started, almost like a T20 manner. In the very fast day, he has issued, I think, close to 100 executive orders, and that includes his intention of coming out of Paris Agreement, and also he has already announced severing the tie with WHO. I'm mentioning WHO here for a specific reason because WHO has been working now closely with the climate change, and the health impact of climate change is all to for everybody to see. So let's start on that. Ajit, how you see this Donald Trump presidency 2.0 pans out vis-a-vis climate change action?
Jayanta, this is definitely a massive setback to the global climate action. And the second term of President Donald Trump is going to be far more worse than what we saw last time. As my own friends in the US are saying that this administration is way more prepared than the last time. There was a lot more ad hocism in his actions in the previous term. It's not that he's not going to be doing that, but his team is much more prepared. And the implications are going to be at the global level. So I would say it's not just climate, it's a global political crisis unfolding, which is going to have wide-ranging implications for both domestic environment protections and the global efforts to combat climate change. And the impacts on human rights and other aspects of biodiversity protection are also really under threat.
Ajit, the important point you just mentioned that his team seems to be much well prepared to counter the climate action. So it means that it doesn't boil down to a single person. There was a perception around that Donald Trump is as a person is an anti-climate. He's a climate skeptic, and it basically comes out of his own understanding of whatever the climate change means and the way it should have been countered. But as we were mentioning, that his team is also pretty well prepared to have this so-called quote unquote anti-climate action. So, would you elaborate on that? How you see it?
Let's understand, Jayanta, that the first term was seen as an accident when people were not aware and they were swayed by his speeches. People knew the kind of damage he caused, not only to the environmental protection work or climate action, or going really against human rights and causing many other violations. Despite that, he comes back with an overwhelming support. The
Right.
term that is being used in the US is Trumpism, which goes way beyond an individual. And there is this whole notion that this is how America should develop. And
Mhm.
so you see that the administration now is going to follow that Trumpism in all its policies and actions. So imagine on the climate side, they're saying they'll declare an energy emergency so that they can use all the power and resources to build critical fossil fuel infrastructure. Now, on one hand, we have seen the fires in California, and Trump seemed to deny again the climate change causing it or exacerbating it. Yet, it's going to invest lot more in the fossil fuel expansion. So, this is just mind-boggling to see a climate denier now leading the country, which is the biggest historical emitter and already the top fossil fuel producer, which is going to cause more harm.
Now that is quite a bad news because, as you said, the first time around, people thought it a kind of an accident. Here is a guy who is kind of his own thinks about the climate is not an issue. But now, as you mentioning that it's a system now. Trumpism is growing, and the administration will follow it up. So that's even more dangerous for the global climate action. Now, before I come to that, can you specifically what exactly it means? Does it mean that US will come out of the Paris Agreement? Does it mean that it will stop funding whatever the little funds they are providing at bilateral scale, at multilateral scale? What exactly boils down to ground level action, or I may put it inaction, vis-a-vis climate change on the US part?
Sure. Let me start with what he's going to do in the US. He is now making all efforts to scale back the support that Biden administration provided to the renewable energy industry, wind and solar. And that's going to jeopardize the clean energy transition that US finally started seeing in the last few years. He will also end leasing to massive wind farms that were coming up, because his argument is that these wind farms degrade natural landscapes. So he's going to protect those landscapes. He's also going to roll back many of the environmental protections and regulations which were limiting greenhouse gas emissions on various consumer goods and other polluting industries. And he's also going to review all regulations that are, in his view, impose undue burden on energy production. Clearly, he's going to take the side of mining and fossil fuel industry. So basically, weakening energy efficiency standards and rolling back all the support to the renewable energy industry, which means that the US emissions are now going to rise and rise massively, because the fossil fuel production is also going to increase, and then, of course, the export. Now, even the targets that Biden administration had set were not as per the fair share of United States. And imagine rolling that back and going for more fossil fuel production. And we all know that emissions anywhere are going to impact the whole climate system globally. So first of all, it's going to exacerbate the climate crisis and make it worse. Second, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement means that whatever little money that Biden administration was providing, and the reason I'm saying little, even if it now runs into a couple of billions of dollars annually, yet it's not close to the fair share of the US. We know that the needs are in trillions. Imagine not a single penny coming from the US. And that's going to create a massive hole in climate finance. And it's going to affect all developing countries, particularly vulnerable countries, and even large countries like India.
Before I come to another very important related point, let me try to understand from you that he has announced his intention to come out of Paris Agreement again. Now, what does that realistically mean? I think there is a timeline you need to follow before you formally come out of it. Last time, I'd say about 3 years or something. So, what exactly, if he tomorrow announces his intention to come out of Paris Agreement, how it affects the agreement in short term and long term? Can he come out straight away, or will be a timeline in between?
So there is going to be a timeline, but his announcement itself is going to impact the way US negotiates, and it's going to cause more disruption in the climate negotiations. One thing to note that so far, his administration has announced that it's going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, not from the convention. And convention is the bigger umbrella. And there are negotiating streams which are part of that convention. So the COP process overall that comes
Sorry,
under
sorry to
the
interrupt you. I'm trying
convention.
to understand. So you're saying that it's from the Paris Agreement, not from UNFCCC.
Exactly, not from the convention. And Paris Agreement is part of the convention. So the COP
Right.
process is technically under the convention, whereas what we call CMA now is part of Paris Agreement. So which means that US is going to be participating even during this interim period when they are officially out, and in general as part of other negotiating streams and as part of the overall COP process. And the fear is that it's going to be far more destructive than what we have seen in US. And we know that obstructionism has been a fabric of US negotiations for decades. So it's not only
Yeah.
Trump. It's only going to get far more worse.
Another point, he has announced also his intention to come out of World Health Organization. Now, that's a huge implication. And we know that during the COVID, how WHO played a very key role. But I'm trying to link it with the climate process. Of late, in fact, I think in Dubai, we saw a major pledge being taken by more than 140 countries linking climate change and health, public health. and it has strengthened over the years. And last year, in the last COP, also he have found that it has been taken a step forward. Now, with WHO, with Trump kind of showing his intention to come out of WHO, does it mean also this process gets hampered? This whole linkage of climate change and health being talked about is going to be impacted as well?
No, no doubt about it. And overall, we have seen that the health sector has finally begun to recognize the impacts of not only climate change, but the extraction and the use of fossil fuels directly. And on one hand, Trump is weakening the environmental regulation, which is going to cause more air and water pollution. And then that air and water pollution is going to cause more health impacts. And imagine that there is very little support coming from the UN system, that's WHO, to help people. So, which is going to actually further cause public health challenges. And there are many countries, especially these smaller ones, depend on US aid for health programs. So WHO not getting that support is going to really have a ripple effect on the kind of work that is needed now much more to respond to the health impacts of climate change.
Uh, Before I go to that part where the last time we saw that while formally US as a country has kind of withdrawn from the process of negotiation and Paris Agreement, on the other side, there are parts of US who are saying we are still in, and they have put up even the formal major kind of uh, major symposiums and all that there. But before that, uh, let me ask you that how you feel the world will the outer world beyond US will kind of react to this, because I remember when the first time he became the president, there was an immediate COP, and then that COP like this year, and that COP for first 3 4 days, the global leaders were kind of, they didn't know what to say. So how you see that now the world is now knows Trump much better, so they may be in a better position to react and respond. So how you see the world as a whole will react to this Trumpism, so to say?
So when Trump became president for the first time and the announcement came in November 2016, the whole world was in a state of shock. And their responses were very spontaneous. And they denounced what he was saying as a climate denier, and they committed and reaffirmed the climate action that they, imagine 2016, we just came out of Paris Agreement, right? And so they had to reaffirm their commitment. This time, their response, of course, we have heard from European leaders and others who are saying that they will continue with their climate action, and which is absolutely needed. But their response is not as strong as it was
Mhm.
last time, because
Exactly.
they know that now Trump is a phenomenon and they will have to deal with it. They can't just make a political statement and it's not a temporary storm of 4 years and it seems it's going to stay. So that's why the world leaders this time, while recommitting to climate action, are far more cautious because they also want to engage with the US. At the same time, I would say we still can work with various states and cities and private entities in the US, especially the one that have Democrat government and a political leaning, to continue with the climate action and become climate leaders in this space. But I must say that because the way Trump is coming so strongly on the rollback of environmental standards and support, it's quite likely that the financial sector is going to be extremely cautious in supporting renewable energy projects, which means that the impact on the overall finance availability for climate action is going to be jeopardized.
So both domestically and internationally, it is going to have huge implication. And as you have pointed out, the world leaders really seem to be much more cautious. They are not coming out in the open with the way they have done the last time when Trump came to power. Now, another point is, apart from the world leaders, there are other institutions like World Bank, IMF, they're all being quite supporting the climate action in whatever they could. So you feel the implication will also be on this financial institutions across the world in terms of uh, supporting climate action?
Well, there is no doubt that in the last few years, we have seen that World Bank and IMF have committed to climate action. Of course, they need to do much more, and they have a real
Right.
bad historical record of even promoting fossil fuels. We must recognize that US is the biggest shareholder um, uh, at the World Bank, and
Exactly
which
the
means
point I
that
was.
it's going to call out policies which are not in sync with now the policy narrative that they are promoting. So there is a huge fear that it's only recent that World Bank has come on board and talking about multiplying its funding to developing countries for climate action. And if that is going to be pulled back, it's going to have a huge impact. So it's only a couple of days. Trump is in, and every day he's coming up with some new action to roll back a lot of work that happened in the US on climate, although insufficient, yet it was a positive action. So yet to be seen how is going to influence the World Bank and other such financial institutions directly.
Harjeet, World Bank specifically say on loss and damage, the World Bank is in charge of this transitional facility for few years for the loss and damage funding. Now, there's a funding process which has realized after a long, long fight, I think more than 3 decades fight by the civil society, by the developing countries and others, and now just shaping up. And now at this stage, if Trumpism dominates in that way, as you mentioned, then do you feel that the loss and damage fund, which has just been taking shape, will be affected a lot?
Absolutely. And the overall flow of finance is going to be affected, and that's also going to impact the new loss and damage fund, which barely has $750 million. And the US contribution, although was very tiny, $17.5 million. Yet we were hoping to put more pressure on the US to provide its fair share of finance. So on one hand, we definitely are not going to get any support from the US, but this is where other developed countries have to step up, Jayanta. They can't hide behind the US, and that's an important point. And they always resisted to come up with the individual country fair share of climate finance. They always said it's one developed country bloc that's going to provide finance as part of their obligation. Now, if one or two members really pull back and default on their obligations, others have to step up. It's a moral as well as legal responsibility.
So Brazil COP30 is going to be a very critical one, I understand. Now, before I wind up with India's impact, a quick question. There's a counterpoint being also talked about that this much of his Trump and people really don't understand Trump. What he does tomorrow, he's just like a dusra. He just can't do anything. Uh, you never know what he's going to do tomorrow.
Well, they did
So
that to TikTok, so.
but I agree with you that he's a designing madness. It's
Hmm.
not he has a complete design as we
Hmm.
understand. But the point is that there's a theory going on that the areas, the countries from where Trump led, many of those received support from Biden administration in terms of EV and all, and they feel that money has already gone to them. So you carry on with your agenda with fossil fuel, but don't stop us doing what we are doing. So there's a bit of a counterpoint being talked about. So how you see it? Is it real or is it perceived?
No, definitely there is going to be a resistance from the clean and renewable energy industry, which really created hundreds of thousands of jobs in the last few years. And we have seen massive growth again in these sectors. So they are going to resist. And also the trend is global. So if US is not going to invest into renewable energy, China is already taking a lead. We are seeing European
Right.
Union and countries like India and others have invested massively. So US is going to lose out market and the economic opportunity. So the industry is definitely going to fight back and will demand some kind of support to continue with the renewable energy. And the China angle, Jayanta, is very important. And maybe Trump would realize when he gets into real politics and understands the impact of withdrawing from renewable energy on its own economy, then probably he'll realize, and there may be some support continuing to the renewable energy industry
This
and
is
such as EV.
this is interesting. So climate market kind of countering Trump to a point. So maybe not may not be the politicians, but the market can
Well,
counter.
he's a businessman. He may
Exactly.
listen to that. I mean, he listened to TikTok, which is a
Mm,
pure Chinese product. So
exactly.
he's now trying to argue. So there are indications. Let's see how things unfold.
So that will be interesting to well that if the market takes on, how can Trump counter the climate market? And as you say, that renewable energy in China or India taking shape and U.S. business losing out, that could be a very interesting scenario. Now, finally, to India. Uh, I know that Trump coming to power has several layers of implications for Indian politics. But let us kind of restrict ourselves to the climate part and environmental part. That how you see India's vulnerable population, be it in Uttarakhand, Assam, Bihar, or West Bengal, Sundarbans, how they are going to be affected in short term and long term due to Trump coming to power second time and doing whatever he's doing.
So, Janta, as I said earlier, the actions or inactions of the US government are going to impact the entire global climate system. So, more fossil fuel production is going to increase the warming, leading to more impacts. And no finance coming in is going to affect climate action. And same is true for India. Now, of course, on adaptation or dealing with loss and damage, India has not been getting any international finance. And that's going to be the scenario even in the next few years, especially when the money is so less. And there are a number of vulnerable countries, least developed countries, and island states who need that money much more than a large country like India because it has more economic capacity. Having said that, the overall flow of finance reducing is going to impact India's action, particularly on mitigation or accessing technology, which means that it's going to be putting more, and already 83% of green finance is domestic, and that's 21, 22 figures. So clearly, India is largely on its own, and now it's going to get even less support from the international system, particularly the US. And adaptation and loss and damage, India has a responsibility to protect its own citizens, understanding that international climate finance on these issues is going to be extremely limited or probably not even available to a country like India.
So more emphasis and impact on the domestic resources. My final question is politically, this is a very important time. And if you have noticed that the first meeting that the US administration had with a foreign country happened to be with India yesterday, the first meeting of the foreign secretary. Now, because of the fact China factor is there, US wants to get close with the India to counter that point. So there are various things are there. So how India as a country, as a political institution, will respond to US vis-a-vis climate change? Do you see that India kind of going with whatever politics says indirectly in cohort, or India taking a strong position about it? How you see India's position vis-a-vis climate action will unfold with Trump coming to power? That's a very tricky area,
Yeah.
not a very straightforward line, but still, how you perceive it?
Well, it's going to be a tightrope walk for a country like India, which has a relationship with the US beyond climate, and there's a lot of business that we do with each other, and this is where Trump now, particularly mentioning China and India for the kind of access these two countries have to the US market. And also, he says that you need to reduce your import duties. So the impact is way beyond climate.
Yeah.
And India is going to be very cautious, it seems, criticizing US out in the open because they know that it's not, diplomacy anymore. And the kind of knee-jerk response and reactions that come from the Trump, they can't just say it. And we have seen India, on one hand, signing agreement with the US on various other economic aspects, but going to climate negotiations, clearly calling out the US. I don't think that's going to happen so vocally, knowing that the reaction and the retaliation that can
But
come from
Harjeet,
Trump.
Biden and Trump are different. Biden and Trump are different.
Exactly,
You can't
exactly.
use
That's what
that
I'm
Biden.
saying. So India now
Trump
needs
is
to
different.
be. Trump is different. So there could be retaliation if India is extremely vocal. But that's my assessment. I'm not advocating that India should be, but when
Right.
it comes to geopolitics, this is how we are likely to see
And it's
really
also
winds
getting trickier.
changing.
It's also getting trickier, Harjeet, with the Bangladesh situation emerging up, China at one hand. So India's closeness to US politically, geopolitically is also very critical. That has to be
Exactly,
accepted on the outset. So that's
exactly.
very. So thanks, Harjeet. It's wonderful to speak to you as always, and it's really really important to understand for the climate uh, kind of experts and climate activists around the world that how they should kind of react to it. So it's early days. He has just been to, I think, about 48 hours or about 72 hours, but already he has created ripples, and I think the ripples are going to get bigger.
Yeah,
Somebody was telling me he's like a El Nino in global politics, just kind of disturbing everything, and people don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
exactly.
But as you say, as you mentioned in course of your presentation and course of your talk, that when he gets into the real politics, he might be kind of get a bit nuanced. So we all expect that to happen, and we also expect the global leaders with him, his friends, to engage with him, the Australians and others. Canada, Canada is now a tricky area again. So hopefully he will be kind of talked to into some kind of a action. But keeping finger crossed, and I think this story is only emerging. Thank you, Harjeet. Thank you for your
Indeed.
time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Jayanta.